Cooperation and risk among aliens or among animals?
I agree with you, Zora. It is marvelous to be seen.
Those topics and more on this week's BioTrekkie with the Admiral, starting now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to BioTrekkie with the Admiral. I'm Mohammed Noor. I'm a biology professor at Duke University, and I'm an occasional science consultant for the Star Trek universe.
Hello, and I am Jane Brooke. I played Admiral Katrina Cornwell in the first 2 seasons of Discovery, and I'm here with my friend Mohammed discussing all things biology, which is so much fun.
Always
on season
blast.
4 now. Now we're season 4. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Episodes 7 through 9 this time. We're going to do 3 of them instead of 2, especially since the last 2 have very overlapping themes.
Which is great. Yes, Mohammed, you told me that in these 3 episodes, there's 2 sort of major, wonderful biological themes that we can talk about. And I find them very interesting. So I'm handing it over to you now. Tell us what those are.
Will do. So in episode 7, we had the big alien group all together, as you know, the Federation folks and the outside world folks getting together, discussing how they were going to deal with this imminent threat, right? So it got me thinking about, when does cooperation occur in the animal kingdom here on Earth? Because they all basically look like animals. I mean, I'm assuming they're what we would call animals. So how does that, when should they all work together? When not? When is it better to defect and do your own thing? So I thought that would be kind of fun to discuss. When episode 8 came out, I actually thought about the risk tolerance and aspects of that, you know, from the gambling that was happening and things like that. But then that actually became much more explicit in episode 9, especially when Tarka mentioned this idea of expected utility from game theory. So,
yeah, I made a note of that expected utility and looked into that a little bit. And I have thoughts on that too.
Oh, awesome.
So take it away. That the first the cooperation or the choice to not cooperate to survive oneself. Talk to us about that.
Absolutely. So, of course, the most common kind of cooperation, which is not what we're going to talk about here, is, you know, cooperation that helps relatives. Because, you know, if you help your kids, if you help your siblings, things like that, you're obviously helping the passing on of your own genes as well. Because if you're giving food to your kid, then your genes get passed on that much better. Let's skip that, because that's not the most interesting kind of cooperation, even though, of course, I love my kids. But when should unrelated animals cooperate? And this could be within species or even potentially between species. Now, there's obviously costs and benefits. Now, there's one particular model that I want to talk about, and I'll show a graphic here in just a second, of what's called the prisoner's dilemma. This is a scenario that comes from math. It's often used in economics, but it's also often referred to in animal behavior. So imagine you have 2 people who are arrested for the same crime. So each, now they're now in police custody, each has a decision. They can either cooperate with their former partner and keep their mouth shut, or they can essentially like defect on their partner and be like, he did it. There's 4 kind of options there, right? So, and this is a matrix that's often used, the one I'm showing right now on the screen. This is a matrix that's kind of used of what could happen. So if imagine both of them stay silent, they get a sentence, but it's not a terrible sentence. They might both serve, you know, 1 year in prison. At the other extreme, they could both blame the other, in which case they're both like, well, these are untrustworthy people. Maybe they both serve 2 years. The interesting ones are the one player betraying and one player staying silent, or one arrested person. So imagine if player 1 betrays and says he did it, and player 2 stays silent. And player 1 might just go free. So that's actually the best scenario for player 1. Whereas player 2, in contrast, has a really bad deal where they have to now serve 3 years. So selfishly, it seems like the best thing would be for you to betray the other person if that other person is also going to refuse to talk. But you don't know what the other person is going to do. So, and of course, if you know that a person is going to betray, and if you could work together, probably the best deal is for both players to stay silent. Cooperation is kind of this, I like to think of it as like an unhappy compromise.
Well, you know, it's funny because looking at this graph, I can say my thoughts after.
Please.
Did you finish what?
No. I'll go into some examples on the biology next, but please give me.
Because I find it very fascinating the way that I look at it, mathematically, or scholars that use this graph say the unhappy compromise is where, in this case, upper left-hand corner, nobody talks and they both have to serve.
Yep.
to me, psychologically, soulfully, in a way that's the happy compromise, because nobody has betrayed each other. And the compromise that seems like it's wonderful for somebody, they tell on their partner stays silent, they go free, the partner serves 3 years. My immediate question is, what happens on 3 years and a day? The guy who went free gets a knock on his door, and maybe not such a happy compromise he made when his friend comes over and says, you betrayed me.
Absolutely. So you hit the nail on the head, because that's one of the factors that has to work into this. What is the probability that these same individuals will ever encounter each other again?
Okay.
So, but I mean, that's actually, I'm glad you said that, because that actually hits the nail on the head for one of the possible solutions for this. There's a lot of other factors to consider. One of them being that there's one solution that's called tit-for-tat, TIT for TAT, right? Essentially what you do, this is a solution that in the long term works very, very well, is you start with a compromise, right? So like if you're the first player, you compromise. After that, each player does what the previous player did. Right?
But how do they, it might not work for prisoners because they don't know, but that's that. So you
I'm sorry, for the next contact, I mean, like, so if they come together again, let's say, for example, you're player one, I'm going to stay silent, and something's going to happen, you get out of prison later, then you're back with the same person again. At that point, you know what happened. So then you're like, did that person cheat on me? If that person was bad to me, then now I'm going to also be bad.
Right.
So it works pretty well. So essentially you cooperate, then after that, you do whatever the other person did. So what that does is it puts a cost on others for betrayal, and it incentivizes long-term cooperation, right? Okay. Especially for cases of repeated contact.
Because you understand the human reality that you're not going to go there's no free lunch. You're not going to really go free if you betray your partner. They're going to.
No, that's right. So there's a recent study of this on food sharing in rats, right? Oh. And they actually totally followed this. They essentially based their food decisions on the last encounter with the same individual. Essentially, like, you could eat all the food and then leave nothing for the other person, or you could leave some for the other rat, I guess in this case, or you could, save some for that. And it showed that they basically could remember what the previous rat had done, and they would follow that model.
So if you ate all of the food and left me hungry last time, sorry, dude.
Yep.
I'm eating all the food this time.
Exactly. And rats are very smart. So so that's cool. And there's other examples too. There's a study of flycatchers. It's a bird, of nest defense. Essentially, like, when should you help your neighbors if there's an attacking owl? And if the previous time your neighbor is like, whatever, sucks to be your nest, then you're like, then you're not going to. But again, see, neighbors, then there's this possibility of repeated contact, right? Because you're neighbors for a while, and owls will come back in the future. So
if they know there's a nest there,
exactly.
That's so cool that operates from human reality all the way through animal. It's a basic fact of
exactly
life.
And again, it's not conscious, presumably. I mean, it's not that they're thinking through it, but presumably there's been some sort of natural selection for anything that has this ability, that they over time, the ones who adopted this approach were able to have the most offspring and be the most beneficial overall. So that's what's allowed this to propagate in whatever species it is. Now, again, it depends on this ability to recognize individuals, and it depends on the fact you're going to have repeated encounters. If you don't have those two things, it doesn't work. But it was interesting is this basically came up in that Discovery episode. If you remember the Alshane, the butterfly people, they said they wanted to cooperate based on Burnham's last cooperative interaction with them. So I was like, oh, hey, she cooperated with us, and now I think I should do this.
Well, the whole Federation is about this concept.
It's absolutely about this concept.
We will encounter each other again, maybe not for a long time. We might live light years apart, but, or whatever, the whole Federation and the way that it approaches even those who are not in the Federation especially with the DMA, we're all in this together. And
all in this together. It's a theme that I remember you brought up in previous times.
There's a theme that's been going through the season, we're all in this together.
Totally. So that was the first one. Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts on that? It was cool, I thought.
Yeah, I find embedding that storyline in a scientific theory that is true on Earth in real life. Obviously, for ourselves, we all understand that. We watch Scorsese films, and we're like, that guy's gonna get it for betraying. But
great example.
But the fact that it goes through bird catcher,
Flycatchers, yeah.
birds and
Mhm.
rats, and interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So the other one is not that different. So this idea of expected utility. There's elements of the same thing, because again, this one involves sort of this risk idea.
The idea of risk, yeah.
So expected utility, this is a concept that comes from economics, and it's this concept around making decisions when the payoff is uncertain, which again is kind of similar to what we were just talking about. And it's often studied in how it relates to risk tolerance. So for expected utility, what you do is essentially you essentially look at all the possible outcomes and weigh the probabilities of each, and then decide from that what to do in a particular situation. But that does still, your risk tolerance still affects that sort of thing. So you might just be like, yeah.
See, everyone's going to be different with that.
Exactly.
And that plays out with Tarka,
exactly.
and the book and the Federation. And also he used that. I mean, tell me what you think of this, because
Please.
I looked up that theory because I thought, oh, that's interesting. Expected utility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which speaks a little bit to the philosophy of utilitarianism. It goes back to John Mills. And I mean, it's like, but my question with that is always, who's the one to decide? I mean, there's different levels of risk tolerance. There's different ideas of what constitutes true value in life.
Absolutely.
So you might have an economist saying, okay, I've done the numbers, and this is the action that we should take because economically it will make the most money. And the person next to him will say, yes, but it will kill the souls of all the communities next to this river, like you might make money. Well, so
different payoff matrix.
It's difficult to me, utilitarianism or expected utility. And in Tarka's case, he just uses that as an excuse to do whatever the hell he wants to do.
That is kind of, it does seem like what he's trying to do.
There's no expected utility to this. It's just like, I want to do this and I will. I mean, he's not thinking of the common good or.
No. He has a very specific agenda, which I mean, I don't know if what he's saying is honest yet or not, but he's very much like, I want to get back to this other universe.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and he
to heck with everything
sort
else.
of tried to claim that it would be good for everybody. The Federation would forgive everybody because they would be killing. What? Sorry, is that?
It's almost incidental, though.
It's incidentally kind of is like, we've all seen ourselves and others, not just to point fingers. We've all seen ourselves and others rationalize sometimes the most ridiculous things just simply because we want it. And then we paint it over as the common good. I still believe in common good, but I understand that it's a bit more difficult than whatever I believe is the common good. I don't know. That's a very interesting concept to me.
It is.
And what I'm curious to see is Tarka, it's Tarka, right? Not Tarka, it's Tarka. Is he telling the truth? Is it? Yeah. And here's my prediction. This is completely like because I was storylines, but he talked about a scientist he worked with the Orions that he needs to get back to. They made a promise to each other. And I think of Kenneth.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
I'm like, there's a door for Ken.
Oh, that's true.
To come back. So, but we got to get Tarka back to that other world. But
that's a fascinating theory. I love it.
That's seemed to me, we'll see my predictions, but
so the risk tolerance thing though relates well to Tark's thing, because he has a different sort of payoff thing than Book does. So there is this experiment I was going to mention. I found this was published in 1980, so it's not a particularly recent experiment. It was about risk tolerance in juncos. These are birds again too. There's a lot of bird examples for everything in animal behavior. Essentially, juncos had to pick between two trays of food. One tray had this constant supply of food, so let's just arbitrarily say it had 2 seeds. Like it always did. And they were trained that they knew that the one on the right or whatever always had 2 seeds. The other one had a variable amount, but the same average over time. So sometimes there'd be 0, sometimes there'd be 4. So one like the payoff on average is the same, but one is very constant and one is risky. So if they were fed enough beforehand, if the birds were like, they're in good shape and healthy and things like that, most of them would prefer the constant tray. They'd be like, I'm just going to go there. If they had not been fed enough, and there's some risk that that they're going to actually like have some consequence now for going to 2, in the sense like that might not be enough food, they went for the risky tray because at least there's a chance they could do better.
I thought you were going to say the opposite. If they were full,
Mhm.
they'd be like, I'm full. I can
Yeah.
take a risk.
Yeah.
This is fascinating, but it was when they were not full that they would
Yeah.
take a risk.
Exactly.
In my mind,
Generally they tend to be risk averse. And they're looking not just at the average potential thing or essentially the expected utility, but they're looking at essentially the variance there. In one case, like this might save me. This one will definitely not save me.
but isn't that interesting when you think about, like, I always bring these scientific concepts because you would have thought the opposite in life. Like the immediate thing in my mind is someone has a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they really could afford to risk because they've got their house, they've got their this, and they're more afraid of losing what they have. So they, I don't know the exact analogy for going for the tray with 2 seeds, but they're the people who could afford to risk more,
Yeah.
possibly give more.
I think from their perspective,
but they're scared,
Yeah, we have an intrinsic, like we want for wealth, we have an intrinsic desire to get more wealth. For them, they're just like, I just want to stay alive. And like, if I don't have to eat, I'm just not even going to eat. So it's not, I feel like the payoff isn't
so it's like someone, they just like, I want to stay alive. I'm doing well. Whereas the other person is like, I'm doing so badly, I'm going to take a risk. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense in a psychological way.
It does. There's a whole
I've got nothing to lose type thing. So might as well go for the tray that could give me a lot of seed.
Exactly.
I know how to deal with no seeds because I can be hungry. Anyway, sorry.
No, that was good. That was interesting.
Yeah.
So there's a related model under this general heading of optimal foraging. Essentially, like imagine like a bird in a bush and it's picking out these berries in a bush. And it's good because it's hiding inside the bush. So this is where some of the risk is going to come. It's hiding inside the bush. Initially, there's berries all around it. So it has a very high rate of eating the berries. Eventually, the bush is starting to get depleted. It's harder to find a berry in this bush. So how long should they wait before going over to the next bush over there, right? Like at one point, is it like now it's no longer worth my while to search through all of this for that last little berry versus so there's a lot of factors to it. Like, how dangerous is it to fly to the next bush? How far away is the next bush? There's a lot of aspects to it that end up working. I actually see this. It's funny. I actually see this with my son when he has peas. Like at some point, like you can tell he decides that the effort required to get those last few peas is not worth it. Like whatever.
That's funny. That's funny.
Always optimal foraging there.
That is funny. Now I have a question that I've never thought of before, but as a professional biologist, this is your life. In the study of biology, when people are watching these birds and watching them, what is the moment that they decide, you know what, I'm going to fly to the other bush. I'm going to expose myself and I'm going to go over there. I might be in other birds. Or they're watching the rats decide to not let somebody who screwed them over last time have any of their food.
Yeah.
When biologists are doing these studies, are they always thinking to themselves how it applies to human behavior, human life?
Great question. That's a great question. It's tough because we really want to not anthropomorphize, right? We really want to not think of it in the context of this animal is making a conscious decision based on assessing. Like it has to be much more in the context of like natural selection. Like, what would lead to the most offspring? And that's the way we tend to put it on there. We try, it's tough to completely take out the human aspects from it because we are human. So we do think about things this way. It's hard not to anthropomorphize and think of the birds or rats exactly that same way. Yeah.
Well, maybe I know you're not supposed to anthropomorphize. I know that in the study of biology, but I guess what I'm thinking is because we're all creatures in the study of biology, you're studying either the bird creature or the human creature, and you are a human creature. The metaphors or the connections between the human unthought behavior and the bird unthought behavior. I just wonder, maybe you're not allowed in the scholarly world. You're considered that you're anthropomorphizing. You're not allowed to make those metaphors in your papers. I would be so.
It's
I would
discouraged.
be making
I would say it's. I'm not. I don't study like human behavior, obviously, or anything like that. I don't see that often in scholarly papers. I think they consciously try to avoid that.
Right.
And there's often cases where just, the fact that we do have so many other motivations that are different from other animals, it's like, it's a little risky to say like, well, this would make a lot of sense. But like, we have so much more on top of what a lot of animals we're studying have that just wouldn't apply. So yeah, I think generally speaking, people try to avoid that.
Okay. Well, I was curious about that because
I would be the person
I think that's why I'm more on the literary side, because I would be like, take birds, for example.
Well, as you can imagine, news reporters will always ask that question, always. So what does this tell you about people? Like, well, and you'll see the biologists will always like shrink back a little, like, I don't know that I want to go down that road.
I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an anthropologist.
Yeah.
Why don't you get me on a panel with an anthropologist and
yeah, well, that's
sociologist? Very interesting.
Yeah. That's all I have for the biology, though. I'd love
well,
to
these topics have been very interesting, because for me anyway, I know that I'm not being scholarly completely, but they do speak to human experience too. So I find it, and in the show, it's more human experience, even though it's not all humans. It's kind of humans, trying to get along in the Federation and taking risk. And do we try to make first contact? Are they attacking us, or are they just mining and not aware that they're destroying worlds while they do it? And which I'm interested to see what comes up in these next 2 episodes. I'm very interested.
Totally. What was your take on the episodes overall?
Sorry?
What was your take on these 3 episodes overall? I have a specific question later.
The episodes overall, I really liked, I always talk about the acting, because I really feel like it's cast well. Like they're bringing in, season 3, season 4. I think the regular cast, I continue. Obviously, I love Sonequa. I think Anthony becomes more and more just relaxed and funny. He's just, I'm really liking that. I always love Doug, et cetera, et cetera. But Book is obviously a regular since the 3rd season. I think he's so great. I love the Tarkus character. I think he's great. So all the acting I really like. The Zora thing I thought was funny, because I kept thinking, "What? You need to fix your computer. Your computer has a bug." But then when they started, addressing universal themes, like when they said, "How does it feel?" And she said, "It feels marvelous." And what feels marvelous? To be seen. That's kind of like from childhood. That's like each human wants to at least be seen and heard, and so it's a deep comment on our life. We need to see and hear others, particularly others that are unlike ourselves. So that I like that. And obviously a computer is very unlike ourselves. But let's see, I'm looking at my little notes. I like that. I loved the editing in that first episode 7, when they did that editing between Anthony and Sonequa. She's talking to the Federation. He's arguing, can we trust that? I thought that was really great editing. So shout out to the editors on that.
It was nice how the plots were interconnected too, in that
they went
indirect way. Yeah. They're kind of answering each other's questions almost.
Right. The intensity of the emotion and the risk, speaking of risk and collaboration. I liked when Stamets and Culber, they were talking about in the next episode 8, uncertainty is terrifying. Let's be terrified together. I made a note of that. I like that. And I love Commander Nan. I like her so much. And that was really wonderful to see her come back. She's really solid. I liked her as a person when I met her, and I really like her as Nan, Commander Nan.
I heard a podcast just recently on the 7th Rule. And so it's Rachel and Cheryl. It's funny, the difference in personality there, because she was very down to business as Nan, whereas as Rachel, she was smiles and talking about how she loves hugging, and so it was very different personality.
Well, but when you think of it, like Cornwell, who I played,
same.
I thought back and I'm like, I think there were a couple of wry moments when she had sort of humor, like when you mentioned what was it you mentioned when Michelle Yeoh's character said something? Is that
I thought there were no bad ideas.
I thought there were no bad ideas, and I was like, there's bad ideas. So there was some humor, but it's not like Cornwell, you saw her smile. So I think
it's true. It's another example. Yeah.
Sometimes you have a character that doesn't have an opportunity to show those other sides. I liked, these are little things. Episode 9, I made a note that when Saru called I like the fact that they're starting like a little romance between him and the president of Navarre, right?
Yeah.
And when he said, I can't concentrate enough to meditate, which I've had the experience. And she's like, when you're too distracted, do something, have a meal with someone, or
like
try to
me.
engage with washing the dishes, because sometimes I'm like, da, 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 da. Yeah, I think that I'm trying to think if there's any other big note that I had.
Another question for you. You mentioned Nan a little bit ago. So when Nan first came onto the bridge, there was an interesting scene there where, everybody looked back and they're a little bit surprised. I mean, Burnham had obviously seen her, but everybody else hadn't seen her. So they're all talking over each other. And I was very curious what that's like if you're an actor in a scene like that, where everybody has to talk over each other. And like, do they say like, okay, you, and then you, and then you, and then you, but you two can be over each other? Like, I was wondering
both. It's like a both and situation. So a lot of times they don't want the actors to overlap. So, but if everybody is mic'd, that's the trick. If everybody has a mic on them, then in post, they will be able to hear each person's voice, even if they're all talking at once. Mm-hmm. But if the sound guy is like, this has gotten too chaotic, they will sometimes say, hey, Jane, can you not overlap Susie at that moment? Mm-hmm. Can you give me a breath between the two? And it's slightly, there's situations where it might be slightly artificial because you're like in the middle of an argument and and they will ask you, can I just get one clean? Can I get one take clean where you don't overlap? But in that situation, everybody gets mic'd, and they have a mic on everyone. So they're allowed to play the scene naturally and overlap, but then they have to figure it out in post.
Yeah, I noticed Detmer, for example, was just a tiny bit later than everybody else. And I wasn't sure if that was deliberate or she just paused, or I mean, it could be natural too. I mean, maybe took her a second.
Or maybe they asked everyone not to overlap, and she's the only one that didn't.
Maybe so.
But it's the bad thing is if you're doing off camera, for example, and they're on a close up of Mohammed, mm-hmm. and so just you are mic'd. And I'm not, if I overlap you on your soundtrack in the distance, unmiked with bad sound, is my voice echoing off, and then now they can't use your beautiful take where you gave a great performance, or they have to, try to. So it's important.
Make it feel unnatural sometimes then, because you're having to like forcibly wait a second. Yeah.
Right. And if it's really important that the pace be da 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 da, they usually mic that. They'll mic everybody just so that they don't have to end up with an unusable take.
Gotcha. So if they mic everybody, they can edit out what little bit, for example, let's say that, like you said, you say that I'm mic'd, I'm the primary in that, but you're also mic'd and you were talking that they can edit out what my mic picked up from your mic too, or is that?
No, it won't pick up. See, because the mics are like on our collar, it usually will just pick up me. They'll be able to use the sound. I mean, you'd have to talk to a sound technician. They might be like, Jane, but they'd be able to use your, what you're saying
track,
and what I'm saying over you. And then when they cut to my close up, they might use a different take, my close up take, because I might not have performed it as well. I don't know. They do magic, the sound people. Everyone in post does magic, the editing, the sound, the music, all that. Yeah,
totally. That was great. Cool. Thanks for elaborating that. I was wondering about that several times, how that worked.
Yeah. I hope that was a good enough answer. You have to get the sound technician in to give a great answer. Anyway.
Next time.
That's my experience as an actor. Jane, can you please not overlap? Or Jane, it's okay to overlap. You're mic'd.
It's the director, I'm assuming, who's yelling that, right?
Or the sound people.
Or the sound person.
Or the director could yell it if he,
Yeah. Cool.
So,
Any closing thoughts on this episode? Or set of episodes?
I just am looking forward to the next 2 and final episodes, right? There's 2 more.
Sorry, 4 more.
There's 4 more? Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's 2 2 more of our episodes, 4 more of Discovery.
There's 4 more. Okay. For some reason, I thought there were only 11. Okay.
I think that there was a mistake on IMDb for a while. It just had 11, but that wasn't.
I think that's where I got the idea that there were 11. Okay.
Yeah,
well, I'm looking forward to what they do in the next 4. So that's all.
Awesome. Well, thanks as always. Always enjoyed chatting.
It's always fun.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody for watching this episode of BioTrekkie with Admiral. Tune in next time. And until then.
Thank you.
Long and prosper. Whoop. My hand right there.
Got there it goes.